Welcome to Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. In this podcast, we'll explore the rituals, traditions, and cultural influences around food and how food connects us and sometimes disconnects us to our minds, our bodies, our spirits, the earth, and our communities. This is a space that is dedicated to bringing more presence, ease, and joy into the process of feeding ourselves. Today's episode is a really fun one, all about the power of rituals in the kitchen. I speak with Dr. Michael Norton. He is a leading behavior scientist, behavioral economics researcher, Harvard Business School professor, and business speaker obsessed with unlocking the secrets of human behavior and well-being. He's also the author of the brand new book, The Ritual Effect: From Habit to Ritual, Harness the Surprising Power of Everyday Actions. It was such a joy to read this book because I've written about my own experience with ritual in the kitchen and how it can really enhance our experience as cooks and eaters. And it was fascinating to better understand the psychology behind a ritual. So Dr. Norton describes what a ritual is and how it differs from a habit or a tradition. He also explores how rituals can connect us to ourselves, to the people around us, the people at our tables, to our ancestors, as well as to the foods that we eat. Rituals imbue our lives with more meaning, but they don't have to be complicated. In fact, a ritual can be literally anything. And Dr. Norton explains how you can transform an everyday action into a ritual that feels good to you. I hope that you love this episode, and maybe it'll help you to think about the rituals that you already have in your life, or even to create some new ones. As always, if this work resonates with you, an easy way that you can support it is to rate the podcast on your podcast app or leave a comment. Please share this episode if you loved it. You can also become a subscriber to the Mind, Body, Spirit, Food newsletter. In the newsletter, I explore these topics deeper and I share brand new weekly recipes, all of which just happen to be gluten-free. And if you become a paid subscriber for just a few bucks a month, you support this ad-free space. And I am so grateful for all of you paid subscribers. All right, my friends, let's dive in. Hello, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm so excited to jump into today's topic. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you the first question that I ask all of my guests so that we can get to know you a little bit. What is your cultural upbringing and how has that influenced your relationship to food?
Wow. So it's a great question. So I'm Irish Catholic. I was raised outside of Boston, which is like Irish Catholic Central in the United States. And, you know, most people don't think of Irish cuisine as being the highest, like it's not in the food reviews all that often. So it's very literally a meat and potatoes kind of family. But it's funny because with St. Patrick's Day coming up, we do have this one day where we specifically have, we call it boiled dinner, which also doesn't sound that appetizing, but corned beef, cabbage.
Just a little rebranding is all it needs.
I think a boiled dinner doesn't sound so great. But yeah, that's a lovely tradition that we do every year. We do it with our daughter now. So it's like a very fun. I'm not sure it tastes the best of all food I've had, but it's very, very fun.
I'm so lucky because I actually never really liked that meal growing up, but we have an amazing butcher near us and they make it. And so we buy it. And now it's become a tradition with me and my kids, even though it wasn't something I grew up with necessarily, because they make it so well.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Shout out to Marbled Meat Shop. Well, today we're going to talk about ritual, particularly in the context of food, cooking and eating. And I love this topic. In fact, I've written about it in my newsletter. I write about it in a new book that I have coming out. And just as a side note, the manuscript was due last week and I was able to slip in a quote from your book. And it's so fun for me because it's been interesting to read the psychology and kind of the science behind ritual. Because for me, ritual is something that is so felt. And to see how those two things mirror and maybe validate each other was so powerful. Before we kind of get into all of this, though, I think it's important for us to understand what a ritual is and how it can be distinguished from a habit or a tradition.
It's a very subtle difference, I think, and sometimes things that look like habits can be rituals, and I think the reverse is true as well. But to your point, I think rituals often have something emotional. You feel when you do a ritual. It has meaning to you. Habits, I think, and by the way, I'm not anti-habit. I think we should all have good habits and exercise and eat well, all that stuff. So I don't mean habits are bad, but they're a little bit kind of dry and lifeless. You do the behavior, it's good for you, but you do it in order to get it done. You're not really having some deep emotional experience. You're just like brushing your teeth to brush your teeth. And I think rituals, when we engage in them, even though we might be doing very simple things like eating and drinking, we add more to them when we have rituals with them, when we have traditions with our families, like we talked about. Technically, we're just eating something that's on a plate. But when it's a ritual, it feels like more than just a habit. So sometimes you think about like rituals are black and white, habits are black and white, and rituals are kind of technicolor. They liven things up that might otherwise be boring. And that's why I got so interested in them, actually, is because I think they can take really mundane, boring things that we have to do every single day and give them a little bit more emotional depth.
I love that. And it's so true, because I think a lot of us think of ritual and we think maybe of like religious ceremonies or have family rituals and family traditions, but rituals can be so personal. And as I sat with your book and sat with myself, I realized that over the past 5 years, really, I have adopted so many more rituals into my life. And they're so simple. Like one is lighting a candle on my dresser when I wake up, but it's just this moment of pause. And another one is literally tying an apron on my body. It sounds so silly, but the apron becomes my reminder to take 2 deep breaths, to enter my body before cooking, to get intentional. This is something called intentional cooking, which I talk a lot about in my own work. And that is a ritual. But for anybody else, the act of tying on an apron is just tying on an apron. So there is this intentionality, or what is that? Because it's not the action.
I think that's right. I mean, even with lighting a candle, on the one hand, I could say, well, you already turned the lights on.
Yeah.
Right. Candles are for light. Why are you lighting a candle when it's already light out? But we do it all the time. I mean, you said religious ceremonies, of course, use candles, but we use candles, birthday cake, all over the place. We like to light things on fire because it means something to us. And again, on the one hand, it's lighting a thing on fire. And on the other hand, it takes this very mundane object and turns it into something that's more than just what its function is. It actually turns it into something that's meaningful for you. And I love the idea of, with the apron as well. It isn't just the tying the knots on the apron. It's reminding you of things that are valuable to you. And you could do it without the apron. You could always just sit and say to yourself, I need to take more time. But these rituals serve as a little prompt, like a cue, like a little reminder. Don't forget. So every time I'm tying the knot, I'm also doing something else that's important to me.
Yeah, exactly. I found that in my life, rituals are often a means for me to get present. They take me out of the chaos of my mind. And I think I'm maybe not alone when I say I have a very chaotic mind. But rituals bring me into the now moment. And in that moment, I'm able to discover something perhaps a little bit deeper, whether that be a sense of calm or a sense of wonder or a sense of pleasure. How do rituals, okay, so that word pleasure just sparked something in me, because I'd love to talk about rituals and joy, particularly when we talk about food. How can rituals bring us more pleasure or joy when it comes to eating or cooking?
One of my very favorite things to do. So when I teach, it's often to people from all over the world. Everybody, not everybody, but many people come to Harvard to learn.
Yeah.
And so I can ask in a class, hey, what do you do in your country when you raise a glass filled with something and clink it with somebody else's glass? And what's so fascinating is every culture has something, a word or phrase, usually one word or 2 words. In the States, it's cheers.
Yeah.
Salute, and in Gaelic, speaking of Irish Gaelic, sláinte. So we have all of these words all over the world. And on the one hand, you could say, what a random, weird thing that people do. If you're just going to drink it, what's up with this clinking the thing with the other thing? And yet what it does is it takes it from just drinking whatever's in the glass to a social event that connects you with other people. Most of the words from around the world mean something like life or health or luck. So we're literally, by clinking the glasses and saying this out loud together, we're turning a liquid into something that really is a source of meaning, connection, and I think joy. I think it's fun when we clink and when we toast in a way that it wouldn't be if we all just got our drink and drank it.
Yeah, there's that collective nature to ritual. So there's a personal element to ritual. You use the term ritual signature. Describe what that is.
Earlier, you kind of mentioned the word ritual itself. Typically, if I say I study that, people think I've lost my mind because they're thinking of, people in robes with candles, what are you up to studying this stuff? And it's a fair question. And I think for me, it is these kind of smaller rituals that we often come up with ourselves. We have the cultural ones, the US Thanksgiving, food-based ritual for sure. Our cultures give us rituals, but I got really interested in the little ones that we come up with ourselves. Your own candle lighting ceremony, your own apron tying. There isn't a book really that says like, tie your apron in a specific way. It's not in a 2,000-year-old text to tie your apron. You came up with that because it's meaningful for you. And that's what we mean by your ritual signature, is it isn't just following the steps of somebody else necessarily. It's you finding things that work for you. They're small, they're quick. They don't often take, we all love to meditate for 4 hours a day, but it's hard to find the time. Meditation's great, of course, but it's hard to find the time. So another reason I love these rituals, because they're just a moment, but they bring us into that moment and we make them our own.
So you're saying that anybody can create a ritual doing anything.
It is extraordinary, the range of rituals and the things that people use in their rituals. One of my it's a very simple, brief example, but I love it so much because there was a couple that we interviewed in our research, and their little ritual before they ate was to clink their forks together 3 times.
Oh,
I mean, it's
love
just,
that.
right? I mean, it's just amazing. And it's a fork.
Fork.
What's more boring than a fork? And yet they turned it into this wonderful connecting, always 3 times before every single meal. They felt weird if they couldn't do it. It's almost like you look around, grab an object, and that's something that you can imbue with meaning if you decide to do it, if you and your partner, you and your family decide to do it as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So within this past couple of years, as I've developed different practices in the kitchens, I've been a cook for a long time, but in the past several years, I've really shifted my focus into using the process of cooking and eating as something that can bring us deeper within ourselves and bring us more connection in our lives. And one of the things my family has started doing over the past 2 years is when we sit down to eat dinner is we take 2 deep breaths together. And it's become a really important ritual. And even though my kids, I have a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old. And when we first started doing this, they were all over the place. Like they would snicker at each other and laugh.
Roll.
Yeah, eye roll. We still get some of those. But
Yep.
It's like a wave washes over the family. And it's habituated. It's become a habit, but it's also become this really beautiful way for us to arrive in our bodies and for us to arrive together at the table. Do you have any rituals around food that you do yourself or you with your family?
We have a bunch. Another thing is I thought I was kind of a, scientist kind of person, not like a ritual, you know what I mean? This whole thing. And then as soon as you start studying it or even just thinking about it, you realize all over the place all the time, everybody's doing them, even the Harvard scientist or whatever I'm supposed to be. And so one of the ones that we do is a gratitude at the beginning of every dinner. Takes 1 minute, just anything that you are grateful for today. Our daughter sometimes cops out, and says something very generic. So we're going to push her on it. But I think it's the practice of doing that. And I think it also says what you care about as a family. When you take that deep breath, you're saying what we care about is being together and being present with each other. It's a value underlying a breath. And for us, we have a value underlying gratitude, which is we'd like to try to be grateful people. We'd like our daughter to be a grateful person because gratitude is so amazing for our well-being. But the weirdest thing that we do is sometimes my daughter doesn't like to eat things. So we already talked about candles. We put candles in things and then sing happy the thing. So we've done happy meatloaf to you. It's very fun to put candles in meatloaf.
This is the most fun ritual I've ever heard.
It's and anything not everything can hold a candle, but anything that can hold a candle, you can stick a candle in and sing happy, whatever it might be to that. And it just changes it from food to a celebration.
Instant celebration. One thing that you remarked upon that I think is important to say as well is a ritual has to be done consistently, at least in my experience. I would say, I think these are the words I use in my book, consistently and intentionally, because as you mentioned earlier, you could brush your teeth or you could brush your teeth as a ritual. So there has to be the intention behind it, but then also that I guess it doesn't have to be consistent, but then if you just do it once, is it a ritual? I guess this is my question. If you just do something once, is that even a ritual or not?
Some things are for sure single shot rituals. Some of my favorite. So when people end a relationship, or especially if somebody breaks up with them, they'll often do things like take all the pictures of the person and tear them out, or not delete them, but they used to tear them up and burn them and things like that. Yeah. So that's a one-time quickie ritual to try to get over a loss like that. So we do see that they can be single shot, but I think you're absolutely right that when we engage in things repeatedly and they start to have history to them, they do develop more meaning for us. And in the family context as well, if you just do deep breaths one time, I'm sure it would be great, but it's not the same as we've been doing this for a long time. Some family rituals are my grandmother did this, my grandfather did this, taught it to me, I'm teaching it to my children. So the repetition goes across generations as well. The favorite pie, maybe meatloaf, if that's your thing. That I think is a totally different source of meaning than the single shot ones, even though those can be great as well.
So I love that because rituals not only connect us to the present moment, as they often do for me, but they also connect us to the past. And they are a way of, I think you use the term legacy rituals. Is that right? And that's a way of connecting us to our ancestors and to bringing that forward into the next generation. And I think all of us can think of rituals we have, whether it's around the holidays or around the table. My mom always made pie for our birthdays, and pie is my favorite food. It's what I do for my own birthday. It's like cake. Why cake? But it's because of that ritual.
And I think, when we think of people who are gone, we can sit and think of them and try to bring them back. But sometimes it's the things that we did with them that bring them back the most. And pie, my grandmother baked a certain kind of apple pie that now I bake with my daughter. On the one hand, apple pie is apple pie. And on the other hand, that smell and those flavors bring her back in a way that other things just can't do. So when you carry forward these things over time, my grandmother didn't start baking that pie so that, 100 years later, her great granddaughter would be baking the pie. That's not why she started it. But that simple act of that pie being carried forward has so much meaning for me. And now, of course, as you said, it connects us to the past, but also to the future, because I can imagine my daughter, if she chooses to have kids, teaching her child this pie, so it really is this huge sense of time that rituals give us it's kind of hard to get at using other things. It's a nice kind of quick way to feel this sort of connection.
Yeah, that connection. I really feel like that word has come up a lot. It's like the interconnection, but as well as the connection with those around us. And as a family, having those rituals around food can be really beneficial. We all have read about how family dinner is so beneficial, but I love in your book how you say it doesn't have to be family dinner as we think of family dinner, because realistically, for some families, that is just impossible.
Right.
We've got people who work crazy hours, kids are in all these activities. What are some other ways that people can reap the benefit of that kind of ritual without it looking like sitting down at 5:30 every night with the family?
I think it's such an important point because we talked about repetition, repeating things makes them have a little more resonance, but that doesn't mean you have to do it every hour or every day. You decide on the cadence of it. And so family dinner, I think we get so stressed because we think, there's no way I could do it 7 days a week. Yeah. That's way too, how could we coordinate that? Many families have one night a week where they do it. It could be a weekend night, but sometimes weekends are even more hectic. So they pick a night and they do it that night every night. We also have seen families that do like family breakfast on Monday. It doesn't have to be, we have the phrase family dinner. It can be family whatever. It can be family snack. And snack works well. Do you know what I mean? So really thinking flexibly about what time can you find with your family that won't get intruded on all the time. Doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't even have to be every week, but just something that you all know that this is a thing that you do regularly. You did it last month. You're going to do it next month, and you're going to keep doing it going forward.
So we have this ritual that connects us to the people around us, but this also makes me think about rituals that connect us to the foods we eat and drink. And you have a great example in your book about wine culture and how when you imbibe food, the whole process of smelling a food. And this is really, as a cook, what my ritual around cooking, around intentional cooking, is that it connects me to the foods I eat in a much deeper way. And that brings me more pleasure. Do you have any other examples of that, of like ritual that connects us to the actual foods that we're eating?
If you think different cultures have such extraordinary rituals around different kinds of food, Japanese tea ceremony is one that comes to mind, where incredibly elaborate. On the one hand, it's tea in a cup.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it's extraordinarily meaningful for the culture, for families, for becoming an adult. All of these things are embedded in this. We don't always have the time to do a full ceremony, again, because life is busy. But I do think these actions can really build and really start to create meaning for us. And, tea and wine, they're just liquids.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing particularly special about them. They might have like caffeine or alcohol, whatever it might be. But it doesn't really matter all that much. What matters is that we've chosen to imbue it with something a little bit more. When we toast somebody with the wine in the glass, it's not just wine anymore. It's a symbol of our connection to each other, or celebrating you for your career, celebrating you for your wedding, for your marriage. All of these things get embedded in the food that we're eating and drinking. And to me, it's a huge opportunity, because we can take, again, these mundane things and turn them into something that's a little bit more emotional, a little bit more meaningful.
We can put a candle in the meatloaf. It's so amazing. I'm still like, that sounds so fun.
If you think about putting candles in things, it's the most insane in food. It's so insane. You put you light a thing on, you're going to eat it. You light a thing on fire, so wax drips all over it. In any other way, it makes no sense. But of course, the number of candles matters. It's how old you are. The song matters. We're gathered as a family. The candles and the song make the cake, not just the cake, or in your case, pie, not just a pie. They make it something more.
Yeah. And so for the listeners out there, sometimes I think it's easy to think that, okay, the ritual happens on the birthday, the ritual happens on Christmas, or the ritual happens on this holiday or at this moment, but why not bring ritual into the everyday? I mean, just think about how joyful these things make you and I feel. And as I'm thinking about it, I know that there are other ways that I can start to bring ritual into my life. And it doesn't have to be complicated or big, or it's meant to bring joy.
That's right. Often we see one parent with one kid will have a specific food that they go and get together. Me and dad go to that restaurant once a month. And, me and mom go to that restaurant once a month, or me and my grandfather go to this restaurant. The restaurants are always a little bit random, but it's the act of choosing that together. And then that's your special food that you only enjoy together, and if your parent took your sibling, you'd be mad. That's our restaurant. What are you doing over there with that person? So even with restaurants, you really think about building them into something that's meaningful, and not just, I guess we should go to some restaurant today because we're hungry.
It's so funny because one of the rituals that my family had when I was growing up was, if we got good report cards, which I don't even think my parents ever checked the grades, but if we got good report cards, we got to go out for dinner. And this was Red Lobster when I was little. And that built within us this ritual of teaching us how to go out for dinner, and going to restaurants became such a celebration. And even today, when I go out for dinner, I get some of that. And we do the same thing with my girls. We get the report cards. We couldn't honestly care less what the grades look like, but we go out for dinner to celebrate. And it's so random. Like, I don't even know where my parents picked this up, but it's something we do with our kids today.
Mm-hmm. I'm one of 5. And so my parents basically, if they hadn't heard from the school about you, they considered it was a good semester and you could, get a little prize. And it didn't happen every semester. I'll just say that. We had some problems. Yeah.
Well, here you are at Harvard, so everything turned out okay. Now, one thing I think we should mention is that rituals can absolutely bring us towards joy, but rituals can also be destructive, in the sense that rituals can become a form of self-control. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked me that, because I think often when you think about things like this, it's like, just add them, just add them all over the place and you're going to be happier automatically. And I think, as with everything in life, moderation is important. And we do see, of course, cases in the world of people starting to do a ritual for a reason, but then the ritual kind of overtakes them. So obsessive compulsive disorder is something that most people are familiar with, where A lot of us will check to see if the stove is off or check to see if the door is locked before we leave for the day because we want just the certainty that everything's fine at home. But we're checking those things in order to go and have our day and have a good day. With obsessive compulsive disorder, what can happen is the checking itself becomes the goal. So you lose the link from I'm doing the ritual in order to feel a certain way so I can do something else. Like I'm tying the apron this way so that I can cook and enjoy my time. If you have OCD, it's almost the tying itself becomes the goal. And then it starts to interfere with the very thing that you were trying to get to. And that is really, we don't know exactly where the line is between it's too much or, not enough, but we do often think about where is that line and make sure that you're using rituals in order to accomplish the thing that you wanted to celebrate your family, whatever it might be, and not have them themselves kind of overcome you and make it, I just have to do the ritual in order to do the ritual.
I love that. It makes me think a little bit of tradition as well, because sometimes we have these traditions that we feel like we have to do. And the moment I start to feel the weight of a tradition, I'm like, okay, it's time to evolve this, or maybe it's time to let it go. And I think the same goes for rituals. If we get so tied up in the actual thing, then it can be a distraction or a burden instead of something that's trying to, bring us joy and connection and all of these other things that we've talked about.
That's right.
One other thing that you talk about in the book, which I hadn't quite tied together, was the connection between ritual and emotion. And I'd love to read a passage that you wrote. You say, whether they are an invitation to have a good cry, a chance to channel anger, or a connection to awe and wonder, I see rituals as one of humanity's most efficient tools for summoning the widest possible range of our emotional repertoire. Ritual offers the possibility of transforming activities as ordinary as morning hygiene, household chores, or daily exercise from automated to animated experiences, conjuring up delight or wonder or peace. I hadn't really thought about this, but as I sat with it, rituals do become this safe structure for emotion. And I think about the ritual that goes into, when somebody passes away, and these rituals help us grieve, and how important that is, how rituals are like this little haven for us to express emotion. Could you speak to that a little bit further?
I mean, I'm a nerd, but still, it's so fascinating how broadly we use rituals. When we lose somebody, we use a ritual to try to get over that loss. When we marry someone, we use a ritual to try and cement that bond. When we want to get calm, we use rituals. When we want to get amped up, like before a team game, we use rituals. So we're using them for the exact opposite purposes sometimes, and they're giving us the different emotions that we're looking for in those moments. That is really interesting because in the end, it's just a series of actions that we're doing, but somehow we can turn them into the emotion that we're looking for in that specific moment. And that's so fascinating to me because we could be built where we could just tell ourselves to feel the emotion and it would happen. It would be an interesting way to live, but we're not built that way. Unfortunately, humans, you can't just say, be really happy right now. You can't do it, or just calm down, and then you're that's not how we are built at all. And so you can do lots of things, to calm down other than rituals, but it's so interesting that it's almost like we're acting in order to tell ourselves that we're feeling that emotion. And then that helps us to feel that emotion.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, this has been so powerful. I think it's so simple, and I don't mean to undermine the work you do because it's so important, but it's
good.
It's because the most profound shifts I've had in my life have been from the simplest thing. If you had any advice to people out there who are like, I kind of want to do more ritual in my life, what would you say? How would you get them started?
I think two things. One is actually, as soon as you start thinking about ritual, you can pick up that you're doing them. And I think that's valuable in and of itself. I started noticing mine. I think the last couple of days, you might have noticed a few more of yours.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice to just acknowledge that you're doing them already, whether it's yourself or with your kids or your family or whatever it might be, and own them a little bit more. It gives you a little extra smile, I think, when you realize, I'm doing the apron thing. I know why I'm doing this. So I think that's advice number one. And if you don't think you have any rituals, just ask your spouse or partner or ask your coworkers, and they'll be happy to tell you all the things that you do very regularly. So they're there almost always. But then the other one is, as you said, think about spots where you might add a little ritual or at least experiment with it. It might not work for you. It might not be for you, but with family, with your partner, at work, with your food, whatever it might be, just experiment a tiny bit and see if adding some of these actions do in fact enhance the experience for you. And if they don't, that's okay. You just tried it, and it wasn't for you. But for many people, they feel and they tell me stories that these kinds of things really do enhance their experiences.
Yeah, it's about enhancing our lives and bringing meaning and connection to our lives. And if we can find easy ways to do that, even if that's just, in an activity that we might do every day, but putting a little bit more intention behind it, that's such a gift we can give ourselves.
And it's free.
And it's free.
It's nice.
I have one more question for you. This is the last question I ask all of my guests, and it's a totally fun one. It's your last meal on earth. What would it be?
Speaking of family rituals, so we make this thing, now we call it concoction. But it's not really a concoction. This is what it is. It's macaroni and hamburger and Heinz tomato soup.
Oh,
and the reason my family started eating that is because we had 5 kids.
Yes.
So you can make this, in a 50-pound. So that was the only way to do it. But then it became part of our family. And now my daughter and I make it together. And so it's, again, is it the highest end? Probably not the highest end meal, but the meaning and emotion in it, it came instantly to mind when you asked me that question.
Yeah.
It is for sure the thing that I would have.
I love that answer so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing this book. I will be sure to link to it in the show notes. And here's to the power of ritual.
Thank you. It was so great to chat.
Thank you so much for listening. If this work resonates with you in any way, you can support it by leaving a review or comment or sharing it with friends. Also, you can sign up for the newsletter, Mind, Body, Spirit, Food. And by becoming a paid member for just $5 a month, you help fund this entire project. Thank you so much to all of you who are already subscribed, especially to those paid subscribers. This work could not happen without you. I'm Nikki Sizemore, and as always, remember to nourish yourself with intention and love.